This is the story of Julian Marcus Hale and his wife Vanessa Claire Hale. They had been married for 11 years, long enough for love to stop announcing itself and begin living quietly in the background. Like furniture you stop noticing until it's gone. Julian was the kind of man who believed that consistency was its own form of devotion, that showing up day after day, without spectacle, was the most honest thing a person could offer another. Vanessa had believed this once too, or at least she had told herself she did. But somewhere in the middle of the 11th year she had begun to mistake his steadiness for stagnation, his calm for indifference, and the life they had built together, careful, deliberate, real, for a ceiling rather than a foundation. There was another man. There had been for 4 months. And what made it quietly devastating was not the betrayal itself, but how ordinary Vanessa had made it feel inside her own mind. The kitchen in the Hale house smelled, on most mornings, like ground coffee and dish soap, a combination so specific to their life together that Julian had stopped being aware of it years ago. He stood at the counter on a Tuesday in late October, scrolling through emails on his phone while the coffee brewed, already dressed for work, already somewhere else in his mind. Vanessa came downstairs in her robe, her hair pulled loosely back, and he glanced up at her the way you glance at a clock, registering without reading. "There's enough for 2 cups," he said. "I know," she said. "I set the timer." It was the kind of exchange that passed for conversation in a long marriage. Functional, almost choreographed. Julian poured himself a mug and left hers by the machine without asking if she wanted it now or later. She had always wanted it later. He knew this. He just didn't say it. They had met at a work conference in Seattle 14 years ago. Julian had been 31, a mid-level financial analyst, with careful eyes and a habit of listening more than he spoke. Vanessa had been 28, working in corporate communications, and she had found his quietness compelling in a way she couldn't quite articulate at the time. She told her friend Margot that he was the most present person she'd ever met, meaning he looked at her when she spoke, that he asked follow-up questions, that he didn't perform interest. He simply had it. That quality had not disappeared. It had just redirected itself toward his work, toward the house's finances, toward whatever project or problem occupied him on a given week. Vanessa understood, intellectually, that this was how men like Julian were wired. What she felt, which was different from understanding, was that she had become part of the background too. Their daughter Lily was 9 and stayed with Julian's mother on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. On those days, the house held a particular kind of silence, not peaceful exactly, but pressurized, like a room where a conversation has almost started several times and hasn't. The Messes spent those afternoons differently now than she had a year ago. She took longer showers. She replied to messages she didn't announce. She had started saying she was going to yoga on Wednesday evenings, which was true in the sense that she had, twice in the beginning. Julian didn't ask. This was the thing she told herself, that he didn't ask, that his lack of questions was proof of something. She needed it to be proof. Adrian Mercer had come into her professional orbit 6 months ago through a shared client. He was 44, divorced, and possessed the particular confidence of a man who had rebuilt himself after failure and wanted everyone to know it without appearing to want it. He was handsome in an effortful way. He listened too, but with the urgent, flattering attention of someone auditioning for a role, not someone who had already been cast. She knew the difference. She chose not to name it. On that Tuesday in October, as Julian picked up his bag and kissed her on the side of the head, a gesture so habitual it was almost architectural, Vanessa stood at the kitchen window and watched his car reverse out of the driveway. She held her coffee mug with both hands. She was not yet sure what she was going to do, but she was thinking about it in a way that had stopped feeling like temptation and started feeling like planning. That was the hairline crack, not loud enough to notice, just wide enough that, in the right kind of quiet, you could feel the air moving through it. That evening, Julian came home to find dinner already made, pasta with the tomato sauce she knew he preferred. It was a kindness, and he received it as one, squeezing her shoulder as he passed the stove. She smiled at his back. Neither of them said anything that mattered, and neither of them mentioned that this, Lately was almost always how it went. November arrived with the particular gray determination of Pacific Northwest autumns. Not dramatic, just persistent. Julian had begun working later than usual, not because the work required it, but because the office had become, without his fully acknowledging it, easier than home. There was clarity at work. Problems had edges. At home, everything felt slightly ambient, like a sound he couldn't locate. Vanessa noticed his later returns with a complicated feeling she didn't examine too carefully. Part relief, part something that resembled loneliness, though she would not have called it that. Loneliness, in her understanding of herself, was something that happened to people who had no one. She had Julian, she had Lily. She had Adrian's messages arriving at intervals. She had begun to anticipate the way you anticipate a song you've been playing on repeat. On a Friday night, they sat on opposite ends of the couch with a documentary on television that neither of them was watching. Lily was in bed. The lamp in the corner threw a warm domestic light that had nothing to do with how either of them felt. "How's the Hargrove account?" Vanessa asked. Julian looked at her. He had told her about the Hargrove account once, 3 weeks ago. The fact that she remembered the name gave him a brief, quiet warmth. "Complicated," he said. "The principals don't agree on anything. It's like mediating a Cold War." "You're good at that," she said. Not flattery, more like a fact she was reminding herself of. "I guess." He looked back at the screen. How was the thing at Marcus's firm? The thing at Marcus's firm had been a reception. Adrian had been there. Vanessa had worn a green dress and had felt, for several hours, genuinely and terrifyingly alive. "Fine," she said. "Boring mostly. Lots of people talking about deals." Julian nodded. A pause settled between them like sediment. "You seem different lately," he said. Not accusatory. Almost gentle. The way you'd say it to someone you were concerned about and didn't want to frighten. Vanessa felt the sentence land on her chest. She looked at him. "Different how?" "I don't know." He picked up his glass, put it down. "Somewhere else." She could have said something true then. She understood, in the interior place where she was still honest with herself, that he was offering her an opening, one of those rare conversational moments when a marriage can pivot. He wasn't asking because he suspected, he was asking because he noticed. Because despite what she told herself about his inattention, he was still paying attention in the particular way he always had. She chose to close the opening. "Work's been a lot," she said. "I think I'm just tired." He looked at her for a moment longer than the exchange required. Then he nodded again, and the documentary filled the silence, and the moment passed. "You know," Vanessa said a few minutes later, looking at some middle distance between the television and the wall, her voice acquiring a slightly strange, almost bewildered quality. "Sometimes I think about who's watching all of this, like watching us. Whether any of it—" She stopped, cleared her throat. "I don't know. Maybe, like, follow this story or something." Julian turned slowly to look at her. His expression was the careful, measured one he used when he wasn't sure if he'd misheard. "What?" She blinked. The strange quality left her face. "Nothing," she said. "I'm tired." "Forget it." He watched her for another second, then looked back at the screen. He did not forget it. He filed it in the growing archive of things about her he could no longer interpret. In the weeks that followed, Julian began paying attention in a different way. Not jealous surveillance. He was not that kind of man, had never been, but a quiet, methodical noticing. The way she angled her phone. The evenings that ran later than expected. The texture of her excuses, which had become slightly over-constructed, carrying the weight of rehearsal. He said nothing. He was the kind of man who needed to be certain before he spoke. He was also the kind of man who, once certain, did not speak in anger. He acted with the same deliberateness he brought to everything. He began to understand what was happening, and he began with the same quiet discipline he applied to his professional life, to prepare. Julian overheard them on a Wednesday afternoon in December. He had come home early, an appointment canceled, a rare gap in the day, and the house held a silence that told him Lily was not yet back from school. He was about to call out Vanessa's name when he heard her voice from the upstairs study, low and deliberate, and the sound of it, its particular cadence, the one she used when she was making an argument she had rehearsed, stopped him at the foot of the stairs. He did not move. "It doesn't have to be complicated," she was saying. "Julian is reasonable. He won't make it difficult." A pause. The other voice was Adrian's on speakerphone, and Julian had heard it once before at a company event, smooth and considered. "I just want to make sure you've thought this through," Adrian said. "I have," Vanessa said. "I've thought about almost nothing else for 2 months. And Lily, she's 9. Kids adapt." Julian stood at the foot of the stairs with his coat still on and felt something move through him that was not rage. Rage would have been simpler. It was more like the sensation of watching a building you have spent years inside collapse from the outside, seeing its entire interior exposed at once, and realizing that the structure had been compromised long before you saw the first sign. He went back outside. He sat in his car for 40 minutes. Then he went to his attorney's office and stayed there for 2 hours. Over the following 10 days, Julian moved with the focused calm of someone solving a complex problem. He transferred his personal assets to a holding account his attorney had established. He separated the joint savings into legally appropriate portions. Not unfairly, not vindictively, but clearly. He documented, he prepared, and on a Saturday afternoon in mid-December, he packed a suitcase for Vanessa. Not theatrically. He simply put it on the bed, folded her things with the same attentiveness he gave everything, and sat in the chair by the window and waited. She found him there when she came upstairs. She saw the suitcase. She stood very still in the doorway. "Julian, Adrian isn't going to offer you what you think," he said quietly. He wasn't looking at her with contempt or grief, just with the directness he had always had. "He has 2 other women he considers options. His attorney is still managing his divorce settlement. He is not in a position, financially or emotionally, to do what you're imagining." Vanessa felt the floor shift under her. "How do you?" "Because I'm careful," he said. "I've always been careful. You know that about me." She looked at the suitcase, then at him. Her mouth opened and she said, "I didn't. Julian, I wasn't sure that I was actually going to." "Vanessa." He said her name without hardness. "You packed your intentions even before I packed your bag." She sat on the edge of the bed. She looked, for the first time in months, entirely unscripted. "I don't feel like you see me," she said. It came out smaller than she intended. "I haven't felt seen in years." Julian absorbed this. He did not deny it. He did not fight it. He sat with it for a moment, the way he sat with difficult information, letting it settle before he responded. "I know," he said. "I think that's true, and I don't think I'm entirely wrong either." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw something she had stopped looking for. Not coldness, not detachment, but a grief so contained it had no visible edge. "I don't know how we got here," she said. "I do," he said. "We stopped telling each other things, both of us, for a long time." He stood. He put on his coat. "Lily's at my mother's tonight. Take the time. Figure out where you want to go." He left her sitting on the bed with her packed suitcase and the particular silence of a house where something has been said that cannot be unsaid. The months that followed were quiet in the way that losses are quiet, not peaceful, but emptied out. Vanessa moved into a short-term rental in February. She told Margot that Julian had stood her out emotionally for years, and that she had finally chosen herself. Margot, who had watched the Hale marriage from the outside and had her own thoughts, said of course, with the particular warmth of a friend who knows when to hold back. Vanessa repeated this version often enough that it began to feel like a documentary rather than a story she was editing in real time. Adrian called twice. The first call was warm, the second was shorter. By March, his messages had taken on the quality of a man managing a transition, not pursuing one. He mentioned a work trip to London. He mentioned a friend he'd reconnected with. He mentioned, carefully, with practiced gentleness, that he thought she needed space to process everything. By April, she understood. She sat in her rental apartment on a Tuesday evening with a glass of wine and the specific, scouring clarity that arrives when the story you've been telling yourself stops holding its shape. She had known. Some part of her had always known that Adrian was a feeling, not a future. She had chosen the feeling because the future she had looked like nothing, and something even uncertain and borrowed had felt like more. What she had not anticipated was that something could become nothing so efficiently. Julian, meanwhile, moved differently through the world. Not visibly transformed, he would have found that theatrical, but internally reorganized. He cooked dinner for Lily 4 nights a week. He called his brother more. He saw a therapist not because he was told to, but because he understood, with the same clear-eyed assessment he applied to balance sheets, that he had contributed to the silence in his marriage and needed to understand how. The therapist, a measured woman named Dr. Oakes, asked him on the 4th session what he had wanted from Vanessa that he hadn't asked for. Julian sat with that question longer than he sat with most. To be known, he said finally, not admired, not needed, just known. Did you let her know you? Dr. Oakes asked. He looked at the window. Not really, he said. This, he understood, was the real accounting, not what Vanessa had done. He had categorized that, processed it, set it in its correct place. But what he had withheld and why, and what that withholding had cost them both. He was not absolved by this recognition. He didn't want absolution. He wanted to understand, which had always been, in the end, what he wanted from everything. Lily spent alternating weeks with each of them. She was resilient in the way children are when surrounded by adults, who, despite everything, choose to be careful with her. She told Julian one night that she wished they still lived together. He held her for a moment before answering. I know, sweetheart, he said. Me too. Not we're going to fix it. Not everything happens for a reason. Just acknowledgement, which was, in the language Julian spoke, the most honest form of comfort. Vanessa missed Lily on the week she wasn't there with a ferocity that surprised her. She had expected to feel, in her new life, some version of freedom. What she felt instead was the ordinary weight of having dismantled something and then living in the middle of the debris. She was not suffering punishment. She was suffering consequence, which is a different and more complicated thing. They met for coffee in June at a place neither of them had history with. A deliberate choice, though neither acknowledged it. It was Vanessa who had asked, by text, with a tone carefully calibrated between casual and significant. Julian had said yes the same day. He was already seated when she arrived. He stood briefly, that old courtesy, so ingrained it was involuntary. And she sat across from him and they spent a moment looking at the table while the cafe moved around them. You look well, she said. You do too. He meant it. She had something about her that was different. Not happier, but more present in her own face. As if she had stopped performing a version of herself. They ordered coffee. They talked at first about Lily, school, the spring recital, the way she had recently decided that she was going to become a marine biologist. Julian smiled, telling the marine biologist. Vanessa smiled, watching him smile. And then there was a pause that had more weight in it than the conversation before. I've been thinking, Vanessa said, about what you said, that we stopped telling each other things. Julian looked at her steadily. I think I stopped first, she said. I think I decided, somewhere, that you wouldn't receive what I was feeling, so I just stopped offering it. And then I built a whole reason out of that, out of the not offering. He was quiet for a moment. I gave you reasons to think that, he said. I wasn't easy to reach. No. She turned her cup in her hands, but I didn't try very hard either. This, Julian understood, was costing her. He did not minimize it, but he also did not rush to meet it. Not because he was withholding, but because he had learned in the past several months that some things needed their full space. I've been seeing someone, he said, not to wound. The information arrived gently, matter-of-factly, the way he delivered most things. Nothing serious, but it's reminded me that I'm capable of being present in a way I wasn't. Vanessa looked at him. Something moved across her face that she did not try to hide. "I'm glad," she said. Her voice was level, slightly thin. She meant it, which was the part that hurt. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I'm getting there." She looked out the cafe window at the ordinary June street, the people passing with no knowledge of this table, this conversation, this particular geography of loss. "I think I confused being seen with being pursued. I thought because Adrian was urgent about me that it meant something I could keep. I didn't understand the difference." Julian said nothing. He had known the difference. He had chosen not to perform pursuit because it had always felt dishonest to him, and she had read that honesty is absence. "I know," she said, as though she'd heard his thought. "You weren't wrong. I just needed something I couldn't name, and I named the wrong thing." They finished their coffee. The conversation moved, briefly, back to logistics. A shared account still to be closed, a joint membership neither had cancelled, practical things, spoken in the same key as everything else, which was its own kind of intimacy. The intimacy of people who know each other's cadence even when they're no longer following the same song. Outside on the sidewalk, they stood for a moment in the June warmth. "I'm sorry," she said. Not dramatically, simply and directly, the way an apology sounds when it has been earned through honesty rather than desperation. "I know," Julian said. "I'm sorry too." He did not say for what exactly, and she did not ask, because they both understood that the accounting was shared, that you could not, in a marriage, assign the whole weight of a collapse to one person and remain honest. He put his hand on her arm, briefly, a gesture that held everything they had been and nothing of what they weren't anymore. Then he walked to his car and she stood on the sidewalk and watched him go. The way you watch something you understand you are watching for the last time. She did not feel, standing there, that she had lost. She felt the specific and unglamorous sting that is harder than loss, the feeling of having had something real, of having mishandled it, of understanding exactly how, and having to carry that understanding forward into whatever came next. She turned and walked in the other direction. The street received them both separately into the ordinary afternoon, and that was the end of it. Not a crash, not a revelation. Just two people who had loved each other and failed each other and known each other well enough at the finish to say so. Which was, in the end, more than most people manage.